Good morning, everyone. My name is Maina Handmaker. I'm a PhD candidate in the Center Lab at the University of Massachusetts Amherst in the Department of Environmental Conservation. We're really excited to have you all here. Today's event is called Refine Your Resume for Ornithology Jobs Outside of Academia, because we have gotten a ton of interest from student members of AOS in guidance on applying for jobs that are outside of the field of academia. And we have an amazing wealth of experience and resources within the AOS membership and collaborators to speak to the skills needed to build for these jobs and the different application processes for these jobs. And so today's event is specifically focused on how to cater our resumes to really shine for these jobs that aren't in the academic job market. So I've introduced myself. I would just like the rest of our organizing committee to introduce themselves quickly. So Kristen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name's Kristen Rosamond, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Missouri St. Louis. Maybe Stephanie can go next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Gaspar. I'm a master's student at the University of Central Florida, and I'm studying the gut microbiome of purple martins. I will pass it now over to Lynn for introductions.
Hi all, I'm a PhD student at Trent University researching shorebirds, and I do have some announcements that I'd like to share with you just before we start the panel today. Can you all see that okay?
Yes, looks great. Thanks.
So we have nominations open for AOS for different council positions. If you're interested in applying for those or nominating others, those will be due December 15th. So they're looking for a president-elect and some new elective counselors. There are also award applications available now, which the student membership awards are due on December 31st. So for first-time student members, you can apply for that. There are also early professional and conservation awards and senior professional and service awards. So those deadlines are on the 15th and 31st of December.
Great, thank you so much, Lynn. And so now I'm very excited to introduce our 5 panelists. So we'll just go in the order that I have everybody on my screen. So if you all could just say your name and what institution you work for and kind of what realm beyond academia you're going to be speaking about today, so that participants know who might have the best answer to their specific questions. So Kelsey, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Hello, everybody. I am Kelsey Rumley. I work at World Bird Sanctuary in St. Louis. We are a nonprofit, a small nonprofit, but we do a lot of work. Mainly, we do rehab on raptors that come into our facility that we can help and then get released back out into the wild. We do some bird banding, a little bit of research, and then we have a very big animal care team to take care of the raptors that live with us, whether they're permanent residents here because they can't survive in the wild, or we do education programs. So some of the raptors might be flying in programs and things like that. So a lot of my facility is taking care of those birds. Our focus is raptors. We don't really do much with songbirds other than some banding in the summer, but that's what I'll be speaking to today.
Great, thanks so much, Kelsey. Marnie, if you could introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Marnie Pepper. I am a staff wildlife biologist with the USDA APHIS Wildlife Services. And I work out of our headquarters, and I deal mostly with migratory bird issues sort of at the program level. Also am a liaison with the US Fish and Wildlife Service, and I do recruitment events like this. What I'm here to talk about or represent is we do have a diverse number of careers and opportunities in USDA, APHIS, specifically also Wildlife Services. And that is research opportunities, but then we also have operational work. One of the popular jobs that folks seek out is we have airport biologists, and they do a lot of work with mitigating bird and aircraft collisions, developing ways to prevent collisions, but then also a lot of trapping and locations and research on that end too, in understanding not just raptors, but a lot of different bird species, the biology, the behavior of birds. So again, kind of to mitigate conflicts. So lots of different opportunities. Also going to talk a little bit about the differences between federal careers applying for federal jobs, because I'm sure some of you have had the woes of trying to go through USA jobs, and there are some tips and techniques that can help you be more productive with getting your application through. And I think colleague Kevin Holcomb is going to also talk about that too, as he represents the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So excited to talk to you all today. You are in a very exciting point in your career because there are so many different opportunities out there. You have no idea. This is like, you should be excited. You have no idea. I went out with a plan, and I didn't end up where I thought it was going to be, but it was a really fun. It's been a fulfilling career, and like I said, you just got to get out there and try things. It's going to be fun, I promise.
We appreciate that optimism, Marnie. That's very encouraging. So actually, perfect segue, because Kevin is next on my screen. So for another federal perspective, Kevin, could you please introduce yourself?
Very good. I'm Kevin Holcomb. I'm the supervisory wildlife biologist at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, stationed at the Chincoteague National Wildlife Refuge on the eastern shore of Virginia. And the Fish and Wildlife Service, as many of you know, is comprised of several different program areas. I work within the National Wildlife Refuge System program. So when you're looking for bird jobs and careers within the Fish and Wildlife Service, you may look at not only the refuge system, but also the Office of Migratory Birds, science applications, external affairs, wildlife and sport fish restoration programs. So there's many different disciplines within all of those different offices within the Fish and Wildlife Service under the Department of Interior. So as Marnie mentioned, she represents the Department of Agriculture. I represent the Department of Interior, and there's many positions within those fields. I'll also have discussions of the jobs between the different series, like 404 for biotechs or 486 for wildlife biologists, and those entry-level positions and what you should be looking for when you submit your applications through USA Jobs.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Kevin. Abby, you are next on my screen.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's great to be here today with you all. I work for a nonprofit called Manomet. We're a smallish nonprofit with staff across the Western Hemisphere. And our goal is kind of to use partnership and collaboration to address some of the major threats to flyways, our coastal systems, and particularly with an emphasis on bird conservation, particularly shorebirds, which is what I work on. I'm based in the state of Georgia. I work on our Georgia Bite Shorebird Conservation Initiative. And our nonprofit does a lot with working with partners, federal, state, other nonprofit partners. Manomet houses the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network as well. And so we have a lot of different collaborations and ongoing connections to, other Audubon groups, state, local, and national Audubon, and other nonprofits like American Bird Conservancy. So I'm happy to share any insights on sort of the nonprofit world. I've been working for Manomet for about 5 years. Before that, I got a PhD at University of Georgia. And before that, I was actually a naturalist guide on one of the barrier islands in Georgia. So I feel like my path has been a little bit winding. And I'm constantly amazed at sort of how some of those non-academic work experiences have really helped me gain some skills that have helped me in this nonprofit career path. So happy to share any insights and really excited to talk to you all today.
Thank you so much, Abby. We're grateful to have your perspective here. And Nick, last but not least, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Hi, everybody. I've also had a very delightful random path in the bird world, but yeah, so I'm Nick Bartok. I work for Western Ecosystems Technology, so I'm representing the private sector in this case. West is a very large US-based firm, although I manage the Canadian operations out of Kingston, Ontario. I did throw a link in the chat for our career page. We'll be hiring literally hundreds of people this year. Most of my work is actually in renewables, so wind and solar. Marnie, I also had a splash of airport and plane strikes back in the day with Transport Canada. Kevin and Lynn, I've been worked down in Chincoteague with Black Rails. I've done early years academics, did my master's on leaf bitterns, did a lot of bird bending. So I'm a certified trainer bird bender and just got back from Belize, teaching a course in Belize on how to ethically catch and bend birds. So yeah, I've been all over the place too, and happy to chat. And you know, a good chunk of my job is recruitment. So here we go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick. So we're now going to turn it over to Stephanie, who's going to facilitate the first section of our discussion. And so we're going to go through all of the really fantastic questions that many of you pre-submitted during registration. So just stay tuned and keep notes. You know, if you have questions that pop up, we're going to open it up after this for questions live. So Stephanie, if yeah, you could start us off with our first pre-submitted question.
Hi, thanks everyone for the pre-submitted questions. Lots of great perspectives. So we'll get started right away. For question number 1, how can we make bird-only experience relevant for broader wildlife positions? Does anyone have any advice on that from our panel?
I can jump in. I think when it really depends on the job that you're applying for, and I would look for parallels in the duties or the skills that were needed to perform those operations with the bird work, and draw parallels with whatever work you're applying for in the position. So like there's obviously transferable skills, like, you know, organized data collection, being able to problem solve, those types of things. And I would just do my best to draw the parallels where maybe you don't have experience with a particular situation that the job is requiring, but maybe you can draw a parallel where those skills would transfer and you would be able to fulfill those requirements. The other thing that I would also mention is, you know, again, when you first come out of school, you know, I thought like, oh, I'm going to go right into a research position and boom, I'm going to save the world. That's not what happened. I am still trying to save the world, but I ended up having to go out of grad school, went back down to like a very entry-level position and had to work my way back up until I got into the position that I wanted to be in. So it might be that you have to go get those skills too. It might be that you have to go back down to work your way up. And it's, you know, you got to go down to go up sometimes. And that's part of the whole career system.
Great insight. Any other panelists have anything to add to that?
I'll jump in a little bit because I'm a bit of the opposite. You know, we're going to hire for very specific roles. You know, is it bird related? Is it mammal related? Is it, you know, herp related? Most of our more junior positions are sort of more general. You may get hired to do, say, post-construction monitoring at a wind farm facility, which is going to be bird related and bats primarily. But those positions often lead into other positions where you get exposed to a lot of other types of surveys, you know, kangaroo rats or desert tortoise or any of the other like, right? So it's, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's a bit of a hurdle, you know, getting that first job under your belt, getting that experience, building that experience is going to take some time, but it's really important. And the more different types of jobs that you can do will in wildlife will be of benefit.
Thank you so much for that, Nick. Next question is, what skills do you recommend building in order to be more competitive in the job search? And so the transferable skills are important, but are there any specific things anyone can recommend, skills that you are looking for in candidates?
I want birds. And we actually test people. So if we want to know how good you are at IDing birds, if you're doing point counts, are you good at, ID visually and auditory? And we will test people on that, because I've seen the full gamut of, people running for their bird book to answer a question, or, they just got it, and we can tell, right? So, for the bird position, we test, so be prepared for it.
And from a federal perspective, are there any particular skills that you're specifically looking for?
Hi, this is Kevin again for the Fish and Wildlife Service. We have typically hire more of our biological technicians, the 404 series. And those skills are going to be more broad ranging. So they're not, some advertisements you'll see is bird specific or fish specific or wildlife management or even invasive species. So be sure to look at the tags of those job announcements. But there may be specific information that you will see within those announcements that look for those details, like Nick was talking about, even for federal jobs, bird banding, handling birds, being able to put up and take down nets, or rocket net uses for some of our larger waterfowl operations. So be very specific in what you describe, but also when I read those questions, even from the back to the first one, bird only experience, there's many more things that you're doing is a field related, subject than just the birds, actually using those 4x4 trucks or getting on the beach or sand or other environments that you'll make sure that you have to list, because a hiring manager like myself needs to know this person has the knowledge, skills, and abilities to actually capture a bird. And if they, are unable to do certain aspects of that job, it's going to be very telling when you go to the interview process.
Yes, and to follow up on Kevin, it's very similar. Those skills like driving a 4x4 truck and being able to back up and that sort of thing. We're not as specific with the point counts where we're going to test you on birds. It's more of like, can you write good? Are you a good communicator? Can you learn? Because we can teach you a lot of the things that you need to know. And like a lot of the protocols that you're going to have to follow are going to be different. Everybody's got a different way of doing things. So if you don't come in necessarily with that experience, that's something we can teach you. It's just, you have to have that work ethic. You have to have that passion, that desire to learn, the willingness to learn, and that's going to go a long way. Because from a standpoint, it doesn't matter how much you know, if you can't apply it, it's not going to work. And again, be very specific on the resume too with those skills.
I might add too, I think sort of backing up to those ideas, being able to work well in rugged conditions. So some of those field jobs that you have demonstrate that you can handle unpleasant or difficult circumstances. And there's been people that I've hired because I knew they could handle tough conditions. And I think another thing that is really important is those people skills and being able to communicate effectively. I think from my personal career path, having the experience as a naturalist interpretive guide and knowing how to have small talk interactions with people that are really effective, and then also presentation skills are super valuable things that you can hone during grad school as well. So just even thinking kind of outside the box in some of those other job opportunities where maybe you don't want to be necessarily in the interpretive field per se, but sometimes those are some really valuable skills that can transfer into other career paths, I think, pretty effectively.
I just want to echo what Marnie and Abby were saying. At my facility, we're a small nonprofit, so coming in with the very individualized experience and knowing the bird counts and things like that is not super important for us, because as a small nonprofit, a lot of us do a lot of different things. So having the more the abilities that really lend themselves to lots of different jobs, like the communication, high communication skills and problem solving and things like that, are going to get you a lot further in a nonprofit world, especially just because there's a lot that goes into it. So we look for people like that. And if you can see on your resume that you've done a lot of rugged conditions, things outside, because we've got birds that are outside living. So looking for things like that and seeing how we can have high quality people that can work together in a team is also very important for us. So we're looking more for those types of things and less of like what your experience is specifically with birds per se or wildlife. But also when you're doing research and you're looking at behavior, we work with birds that show different behaviors and animals show different behaviors. So being able to read those types of things also is really important in this field, because you can figure out if the animal is doing okay or not. We all know working with wildlife that wild animals don't show that they're not okay until like the last second. So being able to kind of pick up on body language and things like that is also something that could be really important in this field.
Great. Thanks so much for giving all of that advice. So I have a next question about resumes and things that we want hiring managers look at. And so here's a specific question. Are there any tips for writing a resume to get past the algorithms in USA Jobs so that your resume is ranked higher and actually gets reviewed by a potential hiring manager?
Kevin, did you want to take the lead on that? Or I would preface it with a federal resume package is a lot different than a private sector resume package, because a private sector, and correct me, private sector, like it's more of an information grabbing, like, hey, this candidate looks good, I want to interview them. Whereas like our federal packages are being reviewed by a third party, and your resume is basically supporting the fact that you're qualified. So we're using the resume to determine whether or not you even qualify for the position. And if we determine, the third party determines you are, then it goes on to the hiring official or the person who's making the decision to interview. And Kevin, I think you've got some more detailed, the slides would probably be more helpful, especially when you start talking about OPM.
Yes, and I'm sharing a screen right now. It should be basically number 4 in one of our steps for applicant review and referral. And this is quite new. So this is, oh, I'm sorry. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the applicant review and referral, this is a new executive order from our federal government for modernizing and reforming the assessment and hiring of federal jobs. So this was effective December of 2022. But you can see the applicant submits the resume and completes the applicational questionnaire in USA Jobs. HR reviews the applicants, and then it goes to a panel, the subject matter experts panel. And these are for full-time permanent jobs, usually within the biological series or 46, 45 series. We could talk more about that a little bit later. But then you see that subject expert panel goes back and sorts those resumes and applications, then goes back to HR. So it's not those people that are in HR that are only reviewing those applicants. Those subject matter experts are reviewing those applicants and going back into the system to say, yes, we agree, and these are the people that have applied to this position that are well qualified for that position. And those best qualified candidates will be listed on what we call our CERT, our certification notice. And those applicants are referred to the HM, the resource management, for consideration. So I just wanted to share that aspect of that review. So although it may be frustrating to say or have the perception like I am the best qualified bird biologist out there, why isn't anybody hiring me? But you know, we have these folks that are experts in the field that would go back and review. So it's not only HR, they're trying to have a very robust system and you know, these hurdles that are going through all these processes to be streamlined. I'll just go back and also share a couple things within the biological series for, let me just go, I'm sorry, I'm just rolling back here. Between the biological science technicians in series 404 that you see, this is across all of the departments for the Office of Personnel Management, and the wildlife biologist series 46. You'll see the specialized experience for some of those positions. based on education and training or education alone. So what we want to make sure that everyone's aware of is when you go into these websites, you look at the degree requirements, you make sure that you're looking at each of these bullets, because even within the Wildlife Biology Series 486, that third bullet is at least 9 semester hours of botany or related plant sciences. And some of these are some of the obstacles that students face about, I have a wildlife management degree, but I only have, 3 or 6 botany credits, which they would not qualify for a 46 series. They may qualify for a 404 or another portion of that series. And I'm going to go back one more slide just to show you within the OPM, again, Office of Personnel Management, all of these series within federal government, the 400 series, then you can look over here on the right-hand side, the 404 for Biological Science Technician series and the 486 for the Wildlife Biology series are probably the main 2 that you would ever apply for in the ornithology world. And then you can see this little graphic here I just put in for the Fish and Wildlife Service. Most of our positions are within those biology series for careers. But again, there's many others of maintenance and law enforcement and administration and managers that are also within the series. So hopefully that helps a little bit, sharing some of those needed information.
Thanks for sharing that, Kevin. And I do have a quick question for everyone. Do you think there's any scenarios where having a graduate degree can be a disadvantage rather than an advantage in non-academic job applications?
It can be in the private sector. I see a lot of what I'm going to call very qualified people, lots of education, applying for very junior positions. And you kind of go, why? Right? It's not to mean we can't hire, but it's gonna raise a bit of a red flag, to be honest. But if you submit that resume and follow it up with, hey, I'm so and so, I just applied for your job, can I pick your brain, kind of thing, that will go a long way as well. So it can be a hindrance, but for us, having a graduate degree is better. I'm not sure how many people know about West, but we're a very science-based consulting firm, so we do a lot of research, and we do often target folks with upper level education.
I'll just add that certainly having higher education is certainly a credit to yourselves, and certainly with all of the information that you have to bring to your resume. For many of our entry-level positions for a GS5 404 series, we would hire 2 or 3 or 4 biotechnicians every year, and I would see a range from everyone from an associate's to a PhD. So it's very, very competitive. Having those higher degrees doesn't necessarily make you the best qualified. With that, it's mainly getting back to your references as well as your field experience.
Great. I have another question. Are there any specific industry specific terms or jargon that I should be familiar with and include in my resume? And this could be for anyone on the panel.
Well, for like a federal position, it's always best to use whatever terminology is being used in the job announcement, just for clarity, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Don't use different terms for something. If it's listed as such in the job announcement, then call it that, and don't try to make it confusing. Make it clear and concise as possible.
Great. Thanks for that, Marnie. Okay, I have another question. What small effort by the candidate on application materials goes a long way during the hiring and interview process?
Make sure you know what job you're applying for. Make sure your cover letter is unique to the position. I know it's very popular, or at least some folks will just blank apply for positions. And I've gotten cover letters before, and it's like, this wasn't written for this job. Like, do you know what you're applying for? So really take the time to understand the position that you're applying for, do research. I mean, you have the internet, you've got Google, look up as much as you can, get as much information as you can, and use that in your cover. Always use a cover letter. I guess that would be advice too. You know, people are like, oh, it's optional, so I don't think I needed to submit one. It's like, but it's a good idea. Like, that's a good idea, because the cover letter is where you can kind of summarize and build it all up. And that's sort of like where you sell yourself as a good candidate for that position.
So many of us in academia are used to having extensive CVs. And so a lot of applications are asking for resumes. So do you have any advice on how long should the resume be for the application as opposed to our multi-page CVs?
For the federal government, your resume is going to be a horribly ugly, long, multi-page document that's outlining everything that you did in great detail. And again, that goes back to the difference between how federal application packages are handled and evaluated. Your resume is being used to ensure, like, to determine whether or not you're qualified for the position based on the job announcement. So they're going to look at the job announcement, they're going to look at your resume, and they're going to say, like, did they do that? Yep, they got that. Yep. So it's not going to, you're going to be concise, but you're going to be very clear and specific. So it's going to be it's not going to be what they tell you in school, like 2 pages max. I think mine's like 10 pages and it's horribly ugly, but it's got everything in it to justify the job that I'm applying for. And maybe the private sector can speak a little bit more, or Kevin, if you have other tips on the federal resume, but they are, as far as I can see, 2 different beasts and 2 different approaches.
I want shorter. Get a lot of resumes to review, and I don't have the benefit of a third party to do those reviews for us. You know, a lot of what we do is through LinkedIn. You know, LinkedIn is the professional Facebook. So you can have a short resume, and I can pretty much guarantee you, if you made sort of the first cut through a resume submission, that we're going to track you down on LinkedIn and hope that you've got a profile. And there is where you're going to have a lot of your full details and all the positions you've done and all the protocols you've followed and all the people you've worked with and all your connections. And in consulting and private, you know, connections are great. If we know the same people, maybe I can find a person that you know that you didn't list as a reference, and I can sort of do a bit of separate checking that in that way. So yeah, I'd encourage everyone to have a LinkedIn profile, short and concise resume for me.
Great. And Kelsey and Abby, do you have a perspective, what you're looking for resumes?
Yes, I was going to say short resumes for us too, a page or 2 at most, because I'm the one that reviews them, and I can't sit through and look 10 pages for each person, unfortunately. But I will echo that the cover letter is very important, because especially in the nonprofit world, I want to see why you want this and what you're passionate about. So it is important to know what job you're applying for, because I have received them where it's like this person applied to the zoo and they use the same cover letter here, and I was like, we're very different. So it's important to know that. I would say, I mean, if you've got job experience on there, making sure that there aren't gaps in it, because sometimes that can be kind of like, oh, what happened in these few years? But if you're explaining what's going on in your resume, what you've done at each job, really pick the things that are pertinent to that job. We don't need to know everything that you've done, but if you've had leadership roles, or if you've moved up at all, those types of things, making sure that those are included and reflected in your resume. We also love looking at your references. That's a really good way, especially in the nonprofit world, to make those connections. If you've got good references, we might know them already anyway, and having a high quality reference can go a long way as well. I would also say too, if you're listing something like you're detail oriented, for example, spell check your resume and make sure that there aren't any errors in it. Because if you're telling you're detail oriented and I find an error on your resume, that raises questions for me and makes it feel like you're putting buzzwords in that you maybe aren't actually doing yourself. So I would say check those over really well.
Yeah, I would echo all of those points. I think one of the main things for me is it really is a small world in bird conservation, and there's just so much overlap with people who know people who know people. So making sure your references are going to talk glowingly about you. I've called references sometimes, and if it's a lukewarm response, that's like a huge red flag for me. And the other thing I check LinkedIn, but I also check social media sometimes. And if somebody's social media shows them in the field or with birds or doing the things that they claim to be passionate about, that can be something sometimes that makes me feel really good about that person.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, I have one more question for these pre-submitted ones. If you had to pick, what is the one thing that you think had the strongest impact on getting you where you are today? Whether or not that's a contact from your network, a specific degree or position, or a certain trait. What is the one thing that had the biggest impact on you to get where you are today? This could be to all panelists.
I'll kick it off. I think for me, starting in the mid to early 90s, a little dating myself now, but certainly it is that networking component. You have to really get out there, and like many of you and the panel have already said, it's that networking. It's the small bird community we have in the United States and even beyond. But working with birds and having those opportunities to be in those professional programs like you are today is great. But for me, I guess, for me being a hardworking individual coming out of school and college and coming into those positions, taking any position that I could get, and also doing any work that was, tasked to me, is really going to benefit you. I've had people that I've hired over the years that take a biotech position, and then 3 months into the position, they tell me, well, I don't really like working with birds. So why did you apply for the position in the first place? Like many of the panels have already said, again, you really have to be focused on, I want this position because I've researched your organization, your agency, the location you're going to hire me at, and I know all about it before you even come to the resume and to the interview, certainly knowing those positions. So being hardworking, having those networks, and building those references are going to be probably the primary reason for many of those opportunities that you may have.
I think Kevin summed it up perfect. I mean, that's one thing that network, and that's also going to help you figure out where you want to go next. Because if you can shadow somebody, if you can get advice, I mean, I can remember, and this will date me a little bit, one of the first, when I first got into college, I started reaching out to everybody that was in Delaware Fish and Wildlife. And, at that time it was like, just anybody, please, somebody talk to me. And I did get a mentor, and I asked him, I was like, I'm starting to organize my classes. What classes should I take? And he said, well, I think you should take anything with GPS or GIS because it's something I think it's really up and coming. Yeah, we're starting to see it more. I think take anything you can with GIS, GPS. I was like, great. What's GIS? Because at that time, it wasn't, a household name. It wasn't something that everybody knew. So I researched it. I realized, oh, it's in the geography department. Okay, great. I'm going to go over there. I took the course. I became a TA. I did all that stuff, and it gave me an edge when I started applying for jobs because I had that experience, and that individual gave me sort of a tip that I capitalized on and went with it. And so like the networking, but then also being proactive. I mean, the wildlife field is not like, if you're doing this to get rich, like there's probably better ways. This is not good. It's going to be a lucrative career in many ways. But you really better want to do it. It better be something that you're passionate about. And that's, for me, like from the very beginning, I knew what I wanted to work with wildlife, specifically birds. But then once I got in there, I was like, man, there's a lot of fulfilling things that you can do that I didn't even consider. So networking, hardworking, being proactive, those characteristics are really going to get you far.
variety of experience as well. Don't be afraid to switch jobs every summer or every few years in your early days. Get lots of experience, lots of different habitats, lots of different species, NGOs, state, provincial, federal, private. Try it all, right? And I did all of that stuff before I came to private, and I think it really helped me land the job I am in today because of a very broad background, not just with birds, of course, either. But I also want to share a very quick story. I had a gal reach out to me on LinkedIn one day. This is going back a number of years, and she said, "Your LinkedIn profile is really cool. You've got a lot of cool experience. Can I buy you lunch?" And I was like, "Wow, this person knows what she wants." She bought me lunch, and now she's our wildlife team lead for Canada. So, like I said, resume is step one, but tracking me down and and finding me and reaching out and introducing yourself goes a long way.
Kelsey and Abby, do you have anything to add to that? The one thing that you thought put you where you are today?
You can go, Kelsey.
I saw us on pause at the same time. Yeah, I would say networking is really important, especially in a nonprofit world. We really do know pretty much everybody in this field. So having that network to not only to name drop on your resume, because that's helpful, but also having those references that speak highly of you and learning from them as like a mentor, like Marnie was talking about. I've had a really awesome mentor. She doesn't work with birds, but she works in wildlife. She works in conservation. And so much of that applies to the same things. And then also just, teaching me how to manage people and manage projects and things like that. So having somebody that is already in the field and has been doing this for a while and has gone through the trials and experiences that are probably going to be upcoming, and kind of seeing a perspective of how those things can be handled, it can be really important. So finding that person. And I know when I was in college, networking was so awkward because it's like, what do you do? What do you talk to people about? You're there and you're like, okay, you're a professional. I'm a college student. What could we possibly have in common to talk about? Because you're already so far into this field. Talk to people like people. You don't have to be worried about jumping in and knowing all of the jargon and knowing what's going on, but just connecting with people on a personal level, you can get into the professional stuff, or you can ask them what inspired them to get into that role, or what inspired them about getting into conservation in general, or birds, or whatever. But connecting with people is so important.
Yeah, I think everybody kind of covered it already. I think it's the connections, and I think it's not being afraid to say yes to any opportunity, even if it feels like it might be a little bit in left field. Just jump at it. I mean, I think I knew I wanted to work in biology. I did sort of like birds the best. But I started out doing a sea turtle internship and then ended up kind of buying my way into shorebird field excursions with cookies and offering to carry field gear for state biologists. And being persistent, like just don't expect somebody to think of you necessarily if there's like room on a boat, right? Like you have to say like, hey, I'm willing to come. Can I come? And don't feel shy to just kind of be persistent, because a lot of times when people are at a different stage in their career, they might be really busy and they're not necessarily thinking about, who can they bring in on this field excursion. But if you get out there once, you will be invited back a second time. And so just really kind of thinking creatively about how you can get as much experience as possible and building those connections, because you never know who that person might talk to that might end up leading into a career down the road.
Great perspectives, everyone. Now we'll open it up to the live questions. So if you have any questions for any of our panelists, please submit them in the chat. And we already do have one. And this goes to something Marnie had said earlier. This is a question from Emily. And she wanted to know that a lot of the government positions are blanket announcements for sometimes 50 to 100 jobs. So how can we tailor a USA Jobs resume or cover letter for such a job call?
I'm assuming this is a job where there's multiple locations. But we don't typically have jobs with 50 to 100 positions. But if it's something where it is one of those blanket ones, the job itself is probably very, it's the job. So I would tailor it towards the job. And if it lists like a location that you're interested in, then obviously put the location that you would want on it. And again, I don't know, Kevin, if you all do more of those mass hirings. It's not something that we typically do in wildlife services. If we have done it before, but it's for a very specific project, and so your resume would be geared towards that project.
Yes, the Fish and Wildlife Service and other Department of Interior agencies typically do have the announcements that would go out for a wide range of locations, not necessarily the actual job description, because it's a biological science technician, again, fisheries, invasive species, bird management. So be aware of those titles within the announcement and the duties that they list, but the locations are key. So as many of you on the panel have said, when I receive a application package from HR, I want to see the cover letter that's specific to Chincoteague National Wildlife Refuge where they're applying. And it may be, I want to apply to Chincoteague, I want to apply to, a refuge in Texas or whatever, and we all have the same need for that biological technician, but certainly the location is going to be the criteria of why you want to go to that location. So if you're applying, make sure that you either check off one or two or three or all of the locations, but be very specific again to where you're applying, even though they're so general. Because we're going to see that, because once we all receive those applications, obviously there's only a limited pool of applicants. So we're all competing for you. So if all the refuges, gather the information from their application packets, we all have to say, well, we're not, conspiring to say, I'm going to pick this person and you're going to pick that person, but you're still competing for that same pool of applicants. So again, the resume, as well as the cover letter, should dictate, I want to work on a coastal barrier island on the east coast of the United States for these reasons, for those applications. So they're fairly focused. So just be aware of those challenges again when you're looking at the application. Hope that answered the question, for my perspective anyway, for those locations anyway, but they are specific. But I think they're becoming even more specific in a sense that the announcement will say what the position is for.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Lots of good questions coming in. Here's the next one, and this could be for anyone. Can references be redundant? How important is it that reference come from different times in your life? So in this person's case, their academic career, especially if it's been a long time since you've worked with others earlier in your career. So the question is, can references be redundant? How important is it that references come from different times in your life?
I find references to be a little bit redundant, to be honest. Most people are going to pick someone for a reference that they know well and is going to provide them a good reference. I look at it as more of a check the box scenario, because I think it was Abby mentioned, or someone, sometimes you get that weird reference, like this gives you a bad feeling, or, a reference hasn't been contacted to say, hey, can I use you as a reference? That's a red flag for me for sure. And I've had that happen before. But it's a check the box for me. And again, I'd want to see references that are more recent, within the last few years or something, ideally.
Great. Anyone else for references? Any ideas or advice on that?
Yeah, I would echo that. I look for recent references, and they're going to be redundant, but honestly, it helps to solidify that what you've written in your resume is correct and that you have done a good job at whatever facility or whatever project that you worked on. Wherever that reference came from, it can help solidify that your resume is showing you and is showing the things that you're capable of. So I think it's really important. If it's been a long time since you've talked to somebody, I probably wouldn't include them if you're not still in touch with them, because that can be like, oh yeah, I worked with them years ago, and it's like, okay, well then why are you a reference for them? I want somebody that's a little more recent that knows how you are now, because we change as we get older and we grow up and we go through different experiences. So having the ones that are more recent can be a lot more helpful.
I'll also say, as when I'm asked to be a reference for somebody, I really appreciate if they reach out to me beforehand and if they provide the job description so that I can speak to their skills for that position they're applying for. So having that background information is really important.
Yeah, and second and all that, one other tip, if you're applying for like a supervisory position, I have included someone that I've supervised in my references too, so that if it's for a supervisory position, they can actually call a reference of someone that I supervised.
Great, thanks so much. Another question. For the federal perspective, do you know of any way we can find an example resume for a federal job? I think it would be super helpful to have something to work off of to understand how a federal application differs from a CV and how it should be formatted. So is there a place online where someone can see a sample resume?
Probably on USA Jobs, but if you set up a USA Jobs account, you can build a resume through USA Jobs, and I highly recommend that because they're going to include all the information that you need in your resume, and you're going to make sure that it's there, because unlike in the private sector, there's very little flexibility. If you don't provide the information that's required on the resume, we can't call you up and be like, hey, you got a really good resume, but unfortunately, it doesn't have the material we need. We'll never actually see it. So use the USA Jobs template. It will build it out for you. There was another question in the chat about, the requirements for like the 486 and what courses might qualify for botany. There's a place in the USA Jobs template that says like additional information or skills. I put in there, I am 486 qualified, or I'm 485 qualified, or whatever, and I list out what the courses that I use to determine that I'm qualified for it. And that, if it's questionable, then I, will add the course description so that it's clear, like, yes, this would count. And for me, the less guesswork the reviewer has to do, the better.
Excellent. And I see Kevin is sharing something. And after this, I'll have one more. We have time for one more question. So after you share your screen, Kevin, I'll ask that.
All I'm doing is just augmenting what Marnie just said about USA Jobs, creating that profile, and then you can add that to your personal account. But I believe they do have some examples, and the more the better. I see for applying for those federal jobs as well. You may just throw in the CV and a resume. The more information we have to gather from what you've done for your experiences, the better. Because I don't believe you're limited, 2 or 3 documents with transcripts and cover letters, as well as your references are perfectly fine, because you can create that profile.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, final question for all panelists. For those of you who have come from a PhD or a research background, have you found your current position to be as fulfilling? I ask because I love the research aspect of the academic world, but because sometimes the non-academic world seems to pay better or doesn't require endless postdocs to achieve full professorship. So do you feel that your current position is fulfilling?
I can talk a tiny bit about having a PhD and being in a nonprofit. Our nonprofit is really focused on science, and there's a lot of opportunities for research and collaboration. I will say, when I graduated, I did not want to go into academia, and I am not like a prolific scientific writer. It's not where my heart is. So so I find it very fulfilling from that perspective, and it allows me to focus on the parts of research that I love.
Thanks, Abby. Anyone else?
I'll just add that we have many staff on the Fish and Wildlife Service, certainly on the refuge in my office. Many of us, everything from PhDs to masters to bachelors, and such. But it's a wide diversity of people. And I think being where you are in the job, private, state, local, whatever agency, organization, at whatever level, it's not even a level, it's just that those career opportunities out there. I think where you want to be and where you want to stay is going to be kind of a major factor. You have to love what you do and do what you love, and I think that's really what it comes down to. I'm fulfilled every day as far as coming to work and not thinking of it as work, because this is what I want to do to manage land and property and habitats and wildlife. So I think in that regard, it's just like that personal well-being of what you're doing in the field. But certainly having those degrees and that expertise, in the field is going to be very valuable.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists. And that was a great note to end on, because I think we all are in the field of ornithology because we love it. And I think this panel was really an encouraging reminder that there's a lot of different directions that we can each take that experience, both for research and conservation and habitat management. So thank you so much for the perspective shared by all of our panelists. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of the questions in the remaining time, but panelists have been answering the remaining questions directly in the chat, so be sure to check that out. And also Kristen posted several links shared by panelists, as well as a few others, just for resources about the USA Jobs Resume Builder or other job boards to look for ornithology jobs. So be sure to check that out. And if you want to refer back to any of this, zoom in on Kevin's slides. This webinar the recording will be posted on the AOS website in a few weeks once it's processed. So thank you again to all of our panelists. We are out of time, but we're so grateful to all of you. And this has been really, really valuable. So thank you so much. And thanks to all of our participants for joining, and thanks to Stephanie for facilitating the discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for joining.